Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Brian. I'm the host of the Left of Greg show. You're going to be watching the video version of our audio podcast. Please, guys, if you like the video, like it, subscribe to the channel. There's going to be more content on there if you're already a subscriber, and a better way for us to get you guys some more stuff. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. Check out our links down below to get a hold of us and to actually find out more places where you can get more information about this. Please like and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook at HBPRNA. Remember, all these cases that we discuss and all these discussions that we have are through the lenses of what we call human behavior, pattern recognition, and analysis. So please like it, share it, tell your friends about it, and we hope you enjoy the show. Thanks. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right, Nikki, thank you so much for hopping on here with us. I know you're busy and you've got a lot going on, so we super appreciate you having you on the show. I know originally we linked up or talked long time ago because you're a co-host on the Mentors for Military podcast, which is an incredible podcast that I went on because knew Robert through my friend George and everything like that. So we initially kind of linked up, and then I said, hey man, I would love to get you on because you've got a really cool story and everything. So
well, I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So anytime. So we'll kind of just jump right into it. Want to kind of start off with a little bit of your time, in the Navy, because you were, you were a nurse in the Navy, correct? And then you did all kinds of medevac missions and did a whole bunch of all kinds of stuff. You had a big long career. You just recently retired. So I kind of want to start with a little bit of your background there and tell us about that if you can.
So I did almost 24 years in the Navy. I started out enlisted. I enlisted right out of high school. I was 18 years old. And I was a corpsman at first for the first 10 years. And I was a search and rescue corpsman, which at the time there weren't any females in the community. Mm-hmm. So when I applied to do it, initially I was told I couldn't do it because there weren't any females, but that was incorrect information. And so ended up dropping my package, got accepted, and it probably is the most rewarding and most difficult time of my life going through all those schools. But yeah, it's something I'm very proud of. And then halfway through, I decided I was going to do a commissioning program, and so that was for the Navy Nurse Corps. Got accepted, and then they had me go to college, finish my degree, and then came back as a Navy nurse. So as a nurse, I did another 13 and a half years and deployed. I went to Haiti when the earthquake happened. So I was deployed within 24 to 48 hours of that happening. And then I came back, went to Afghanistan with the Marines for 10 months, and then came back from that. Ended up getting stationed with a fleet surgical team on an amphibious warship, which was the Macon Island, and turned around and deployed again. So there was about a 2.5 year time frame where it was just back to back to back. So
yeah, that's
so that, yeah. Just,
so thanks for your
20.
service on that. I got a funny background Afghanistan story for you, Nikki. Back when the Commandant of Marine Corps, won't give up any names, but you could figure it out from the time we were heading into Iraq, and we had this program that's going outside the wire, and it was all great stuff. And so I kept coming back for briefings, and I happened to be at Penn, and he comes up, and I said, hey, Afghanistan's really hopping, and it's a different environment. Can we get in there? And he goes, there will never be a Marine on the ground in Afghanistan. It's not our war. It's not our fight. Marin, how long was it after that we got
three months later?
I'm looking around and I'm going, where the hell are we now? So totally get that. Not very excited about that. Thanks for the length of your service and your incredible service in some very remote and stinky destinations.
Yeah, that was it. I was in Afghanistan from 2010 to 11 and happened to be transiting. So we were mostly on a combat outpost or a FOB, but I was transiting through Bastion right when 3-5 took over Singin. And I was in the OR that morning, and it was just, it just never ended. It never ended. And we didn't know what was going on at first. It was just, bodies after bodies after bodies. And it was unbelievable. So
yeah, that was
now knowing what happened was,
Yeah, I was gonna say that was when things really just blew up and exploded over there. They took a ton of casualties. 3-5 did at that time. That was like one of the most highest kinetic times in Afghanistan for any unit, like the whole time. And they took the brunt of that. So I have good idea of what you went through and what they went through at the time. And I know that's a really, really difficult situation for everyone involved. And I know, because this applies to, like, just so you know, a lot of our audiences, there's military, first responders, healthcare folks, like nurses and stuff. So like we deal with, we talk about our human behavior stuff and we try to keep it entertaining and fun. And like, we just explain a lot of things that people don't really understand or get, but they don't really know how to articulate it. But one of the other things we do is we talk about, just because it's resilience. What we teach is cognitive performance, right? How to think better, how to get an advanced critical thinking skill set, right? And so that whole resilience part and going through those experiences is like, I mean, it's extremely difficult. And so we always try to, kind of keep an open forum here and make sure we work a lot of that stuff in for everyone listening. It was like, yeah, like I can relate to that, because what you experienced in that short time frame in Afghanistan, seeing that is no different than someone running an ambulance or a nurse in the ER here over the course of their career. I mean, it's fairly similar. So I know those times are like the most frustrating times, right? Because you're trying so hard to do your job and what you're there for, and you're losing patients. They're still coming in, and like it's nonstop. So like, how were you able to kind of like deal with that at the time, or how did that work for you, or what benefited you during then to kind of help you perform? I mean, basically.
It's interesting. Well, it's interesting because when I came back from there, my senior nurse at my hospital actually pulled me aside and she was like, I want to know what makes you different, because we had a lot of nurses and doctors come back from Iraq and Afghanistan that just mentally was like, I'm done, getting out, or they were, had PTSD. And I was one of the few that just went back to back to back and just kept going. I have kids. I mean, it was just constant. And she was like, I want to know what makes you different. Like, why are you still able to continue on? And I am a master compartmentalizer. I've discovered this about myself. I can put things away and not
got a lot of rooms up there. There you go.
I do. And I'm a little afraid. And I think that's why I stay busy after retirement, because I feel like the minute I slow down, it's going to just hit me, is what I'm afraid of. But yeah, I mean, there was an instance, and I tell this to a lot of people, but there was one time in the OR, 3-5 got hit same day, and it was an open bay OR, and there aren't any like partitions or anything between the beds. And I was with one of the teams, and I was holding a leg. We were cutting off the second leg. The guy's other leg had already blown off in the IED. And I was holding a second leg, cutting that off. And at one point I had the whole leg in my hand, and I was looking around, and there was body parts everywhere. There was blood everywhere. I was slipping on the blood. And it was just like, I just remember thinking, and it was just the one time during that whole time where I was like, I'm in the freaking movie star right now. This is terrible.
Exactly.
It was very surreal to like have body parts everywhere, and really not, yes, I'm a nurse, but nothing really prepares you for that mentally unless you see that. And then it's
no, that's perfect, because you got to remember, framing it for our listeners and our viewers, what you just did is showed your brain damage. We're all from the island of misfit toys, right?
Welcome to the club, right?
Yeah, exactly. You just graduated. But the idea is that, like Brian said something earlier, Brian said about your short time, and he didn't mean that in the context. He meant that listen, when you go on a deployment, for example, coppers are going to be skeptical. Coppers are like, hey, I worked in, Detroit. I worked in Philly. I worked for this long on the street, and I've seen it all. Yeah, you saw it all in your 25 years of career. But most people, when they're deployed, they condense that 25 years into the next 72 hours, and they never think they're coming out of it. I remember a guy coming in and say, hey, get more ammo because we think we're going to get overrun tonight. And you just get this chill that goes through your body, and I was a copper for 27 years. I never got that same chill. I've been in shootouts. I've been in bad situations. So there's just something different. And being able to walk, like the gosh damn, what was that place called? The Potato Farm up in Iraq, and walking around and seeing a dog walk by with a hand and people's bodies laying everywhere, and just the horror. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. How do you share that? You can't come home. You got kids. I got kids. You can't come home and tell your kid, hey, don't do that. That's how your leg falls off. So PTSD manifests itself in these unusual ways. And you just went through that. without demonstrating one time fear or hate or an emotional register. So you must have stored that somewhere, right? But when are you most vulnerable?
Yeah.
When are you vulnerable? When does it hit you? When does one of those incidents come back and just leave you a sobbing mess on the couch? Because I know that's got to happen. I mean, that happens to me. That's right now that your boss is calling me and saying, leave her alone. But sorry, we're all still at work too.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't. I mean, I can talk about it, and it affects me to a certain extent, but I haven't like had any real breakdown. No, and and I think one of the big things is I really tried hard not to listen to names. There were a few, and the one where I had his leg in particular, someone blurted out his name. One of our nurses knew him because she worked with him. He was a corpsman, and so she said his name. And then ever since I haven't been able to get him particularly out of my head, but I was really good about not remembering names or looking at names, or because if you form an emotional attachment, I feel that's when it really does affect you. And I think that's the difference too with the guys that are on the ground and going out there. I mean, it's their friends that are getting blown up in front of them and shot and whatever. And so that's a different. Yes, I saw dead bodies everywhere. Yes, I was dealing with very severely injured patients, but I didn't have an emotional connection to them. So it's a different level, I think, for me anyway. So I'm able to turn that off and turn it on.
And that's that's kind of similar from what I've heard. Same thing with like, you look at even just here in the US, people, nurses, doctors who work in the ER. It's like, look, that's at work. Like there has to be the separation. You can't get emotionally involved, but I mean, it's still seeing this and affecting you in a number of different ways. And one of the things that we get into with resilience is that you can train it, right? You can get better at it. You can learn to be more adaptable to different environments, and that gets you stronger. But some people are born with a little bit extra, right? You're born with a little bit thicker skin. And then the way you grow up, your environment, that all can contribute and add to it or take away from it for people with trauma. And so I think that's a big thing. So I don't know if there was like something in your life growing up or maybe at the point that the other thing is too, you had already had experience, right? You had already had kids. You had already been in the Navy for a while and then had this. So I don't know if that if you see a difference in that or if that affects things sometimes based on.
Because Nikki, like I haze Brian constantly. I'll call him in the middle of the night when we're together. I'll go to his hotel room and set up one of them leaners, with the cold water. And the whole reason I'm doing it is to try to help him, get through future engagements. But there had to be something in your youth. Was it sports? What was it? Was it religion? Some people rely on faith. Some people, like my dad, beat me into, dealing with situations. What was it in your say? What happened to you?
I think I'm just a sociopath. I mean,
we've already decided.
We already figured that out.
That's why you're on the pod. Yeah.
So now the podcast starts.
Exactly. That's okay.
I mean, there really isn't any significant moments. I think, ever since, growing up, I wasn't the most confident kid. I had a lot of insecurities and I didn't put myself out there. And when I became an adult in the Navy, especially, and starting out with the whole search and rescue thing, I constantly have been putting myself into very stressful situations voluntarily that I've had to deal with. And so I think I've just learned, like the first thing when I reported to my first duty station it was a mountain rescue unit. And I thought the medical person stayed in the helicopter, but over water you do, and the rescue swimmer goes down and over water. But in the mountains, the corpsman goes down, and nobody ever told me that. And they said, so the first thing they told me was, you're going to rappel school, and I'm like, oh no, I'll be up in the helicopter. They're like, no, we go down over mountains, and I'm like, oh well, I'm terrified of heights, so it was like, I mean, terrified. Like I can't. It's hard for me to just even the 10-foot tower that you have to jump off in boot camp, that messes with me. So like, oh yeah, like I do not like heights. And so I was like, no, I'm not going to that. And they were like, okay, well, I guess you're not doing your job then. You're going to, we'll reclassify you. I was just like, okay, well,
That's great.
I guess I'm going. So
I tried to spend the first 6 years in the Army saying, I'll keep an eye on the gear. You guys go ahead. I got this. I'll keep an eye on
yeah.
the truck, you know. It didn't work either.
Yeah, that's, I was kind of planning that, but it didn't work out that way. So, there I am in the rappel tower, shaking the entire tower with my legs because I was terrified. But once I did it, then I'm rappelling 150 feet out of a helicopter, and it was no big deal. So then, I've always been putting myself in those situations. And if you follow my IG or my LinkedIn, you see
Yeah.
skydiving. I'm terrified of heights, but let's jump out of an airplane. So
Yeah.
I tend to do that to myself a lot.
Well, that's what it comes down to, and that's to throw back to Andy Reese in their book that just came out. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And
Right.
I think for a lot of people, it's like that late bloomer where maybe as a kid didn't do it as much, and then all of a sudden had these opportunities. We're like, hey, that looks cool. I can do that. I mean, because I want to bring that back up. The fact that they said, all right, hey, like this isn't actually for women. This MOS or this position is not classified for women, and then you're like, yeah, okay, here's my packet. Like I was gonna say you're very like you're willing to put yourself out there completely.
That's great.
Because most people would just go, oh, okay, and go do something else, right?
Well, and that's actually one of the things that when I mentor people, I talk about is never take no for an answer. And at the time, I was only an E4. She was an E6. She was a career counselor. So, a lot of people would be like, oh, well, she knows what she's talking about, and I'll just go figure out something else. And I challenged her because when she said no females, I'm like, well, this isn't, it is the 90s, and there weren't a lot of things open, but it wasn't a combat role. So it didn't make any sense to me. And so I said, well, can I see the instruction? And that's, what I tell people is like, see it in writing before somebody tells you no, because people talk all the time and they think they know the answer.
Yep.
And if you just take it and you don't research it, then, you're going to miss out on opportunities. And for me, my whole life would be different if I had just taken that for an answer. And so, and what's funny too is that I have never been this big PT stud or, this like beast mode, whatever. I was always very, very average. So looking back and wanting to do that, what I saw was helicopters and oh, this is fun,
Yeah.
I didn't really think about what I was getting into. And I do that a lot. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do it. And then I get there and it's like, okay, this isn't quite what I thought it would be. But, and my big thing is you don't quit, just keep going,
That's it.
and if I can do it,
That's resilience. Resilience is getting knocked back down, getting knocked down and getting back up again. You skin your knees, you get the scar tissue, and you go back into it. And the good thing about deliberate discomfort is that by doing that on your own, by going there on your own, then it doesn't have to shock you and surprise you when it occurs. You got to have some mental preparation because certain things are going to surprise you. They're going to come at you. I remember as a little kid going to Detroit Tigers Stadium, and it was free bat day, and then the Detroit Police Department's SWAT team and helos came in, and guys were fast roping down in the field, and I said, this is the most amazing thing in the world. That's my future. And I was about 11 years old, so I went home, and when everybody went to work the next day, I stayed home from school, took my dad's extension cords, and I made myself a beaner, and I rappelled from the second story of our house using our chimney to rappel off of. So my dad came home and beat me like you've never seen a beating before because the chimney's been dented, and here's my footprints all down the aluminum siding on the second floor of the house, and his extension cord didn't work. And he goes, why would you do that? I did it because I had to, because that's what I wanted. And when you set your sights on something, you got to go for it. And it's amazing. But what did your friends think? What did your family think? Because clearly the sociopath thing comes through like at hello.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You
don't have to explain yourself.
We're
what
like,
what did they think? Because like right now, you cleverly disguised where you're sitting, but all of that stuff will move, and you can see you're in a padded cell. So we don't buy that. That's why the acoustics are so good. Pads exactly.
There you go. Yep.
But what did they think?
They just, it's just, it's kind of been like, oh, that's Nikki. Like, so.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was gonna be I knew that was gonna be the answer. She's doing it again. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as we've come along in my adult life, I mean, I don't think anything really surprises them anymore.
That's good. That's really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our CEO is a female, the most dynamic, deadly, dangerous female that we've ever met in our entire life.
She's terrifying.
She is terrifying.
Everyone
she's always taken, and she's taken and she's an amazing mom and lovely and happy. And she so reminds me of your persona. But when we go somewhere, it's like somebody goes, "Hey, Shelly might be in trouble," and I'm going, "You're full of shit. She's doing fine. You
Yeah.
better start running for an exit." So I get that same feeling with you that many of your peers and your friends are used to watching you at a distance succeed. Is that a true statement?
I think so. Yeah. It started out as, are you sure about this? And then now it's like, oh, okay. That's
Yeah.
fun. I mean, living, vicariously. So, yeah, nothing really surprises anybody at this point.
Yeah. So what, I know we actually usually get there's some of our guests too have been in the same boat where they're either transitioning out of the military or have
Mhm.
just gotten out recently and like are kind of finding that their next path, I guess, in life, or next thing or next group and all that purpose, that mission. So what is it like? What is it for you now? What have you been basically, what's your new purpose now?
So, what I will say is if you are getting out or you're retiring, take that year that they tell you to do and get all your stuff in order, because I did not do that.
No.
I don't know if it was denial on my part that I wasn't actually going to be leaving, but I worked all the way up to my last day. I was at my computer, I'm doing emails, and it was where my guys were like, "What do you mean this is your last day? You're not going to be here on Monday." I'm like, "That's my last day in the Navy, going about my way." And my CO several times was coming out and like, "What are you doing? You need to, like, why haven't you done X, Y, and Z?" And I'm like, I don't know. I can't give you an answer for that, but it's definitely made it more difficult after I retired. One, mentally, just the whole transition period, and then all of the other administrative stuff that you have to do to get out, and the VA stuff, and benefits and all that stuff. So I will say take that year, do what they say. We all kind of don't want to because we make fun of the road program, retired on active duty.
Yeah.
People do
Yeah,
it, but
exactly.
there is a reason for it. And now I realize it, that you really need that time to make sure your stuff is in order, and mentally preparing yourself too, right? And then making sure that you have something set up after you get out. When I got out, I piled a million things onto my plate because it
Yep.
suddenly hit me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was accepting all these jobs and, doing 5 different things, just thinking I needed to stay relevant for myself. Because I remember waking up that Monday just completely lost, feeling utterly lost, so used to like getting up and going to work. And then all of a sudden I get up one day and that's it. And
Mm-hmm.
it hit me pretty hard for a couple of months. And I thought, okay, well, if I just, continue to pile things onto my plate, then I'll be relevant, and that'll help me mentally. And what really happened was I just had too much going on, and I started to feel really disorganized and feeling like, because I've always been a person to give 100% of myself, and because I had so much going on, I felt like I was only giving 40% here,
Right.
60% here. I mean, it was just making it worse for me, and then I wasn't really satisfied with anything I was doing either. So I'm starting now. It's been a year. I'm starting now to like clear that plate and like start taking things off that aren't making me happy or causing stress that is really not needed at this point in my life. So, and I'm starting to get more comfortable with, being out of the military, to the point where I can't imagine going back at the, because if you would have asked
Right.
me a few months out, I would have said, I'd love to go back.
In a
Yeah,
New
Now
for
I'm
York
just
sure.
like,
second, right?
Yeah.
yeah. But now I feel like I'm good. I don't need to be so connected to the military anymore. So
Well, plus there's like, I mean, you seem pretty connected. I am in some ways, but there's obviously a whole community and now culture that has really sprung up
yeah,
over the last few years of veterans, which is good and bad. There's always like the downside of that too, but like there's a lot of people just organizing, staying together, creating that community, and finding that and like building that up now to where there's like people have successful businesses and they're doing things on Washington D.C. up on Capitol Hill, getting legislation passed, like all this really awesome stuff that now we're kind of leveraging all the social media to be like, all right, hey, let's create a space where we can figure stuff out and advance those causes that we need to. And I know you're involved with a bunch. I know you're always putting people out on blast, like, hey, follow this guy or check this out or look at what these people
yeah.
are doing, which is awesome because again, that just brings awareness to that cause. But what are you like? what are you getting involved with now? I mean, what's your passion in all these groups?
So the GSMSG group, I had been talking to the president of that organization for a few years now, but I just couldn't do anything with him because I was active duty. So the places that they go to, the military usually frowns upon, if you just go on your own on vacation to Iraq.
Yeah, and that's so everyone's listening to the Global Surgical Medical Group. That's like a nonprofit where it's all healthcare workers like yourself who go deploy to war zones, basically, but not
Right.
with the military, just on their own to go care for civilians, correct?
Right. So they're actually unique in the sense that we have surgeons, we have ER physicians, we have nurses, we have medics, we have a lot of ex-special forces guys. We have a very diverse group that has a capability that exceeds pretty much most of those type of organizations that I know of. Because usually those organizations have doctors or they have some medics or whatever, but they don't have that surgical capability. So
Right.
GSMSG can put role 2 to role 3 type entities in these areas, which is pretty unheard of. So yeah, it's a group that I'm really glad that I went to Iraq with them in October, and if you ever read the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, it made sense because it helps with that transition, right? Is finding those like-minded people, and none of us had actually met in person before that, and we just clicked automatically because we all have that similar background, and we all kind of think the same way. We have the same work ethic. Aaron, who's the president of the organization, is really good at putting people together that he knows are going to click. So we got on the ground and just we all you would have thought we've known each other for years, and we just met, most of us, for the first time. So that's really important, and I talk to people about that as well, is that if you're struggling to find those people that understand where you're coming from, you can talk to, I have really good friends that I talk to every day that are civilians and don't have the military background, but they still don't quite understand what I'm saying or where I come from. And, to be around a group that just automatically gets it, without having to explain a whole lot, that makes a big difference.
Oh, so. One problem is approach too. You got to remember that the age differences between veterans. So one of the things that I identify is, like, you can go to VFW Hall, or if you can go to the American Legion for those people that, let's say, didn't deploy to a combat zone. And so I'll hear a young vet sometimes, because a lot of times the age groups that we're dealing with are pre-deployment Marines and soldiers. So they're younger, right? And then all of a sudden come multiple deployment soldiers, and they get a little older, but they're still young kids comparatively. And then you take a look at these organizations. What's the first thing that they say? That, well, there's not a lot of help out there. Well, these organizations have been around for dozens of years, and some of them for tens of years. But what's the difference? When you walk into one of those today, a VFW Hall or American Legion, what's the first thing you encounter? The bar. And so the idea of going to a bar and drinking every bottle of Jameson they've got in the place to loosen up enough to talk about it, that was a thing our parents did. Hell, they had happy hour. You came, and that's how you unwound. And it's only now that some of that, and Brian always corrects me and says, oh, it's been around for a while. Yeah, but not in my community. And that's the funny thing, is that I can run in the younger communities because they go, hey, you're that pre-deployment guy. But then when I run with my own folks, they're sitting there and going, those darn whippersnappers, we didn't have any of the great programs that they have now. So the wonderful thing is, one, you're still staying relevant. You use that term a lot. The other thing is that anybody nowadays, anybody in this era that says that they don't have programs, that means they haven't gone to the VA, that they haven't gone in their community, they haven't gone into the military or DOD, because there's more communities than you ever seen. And I'm not bashing VFW. They're catching on. So are the American Legion posts and many of the other organizations. So if you stay active, then you don't have a lot of time. My dad used to say that all the time. The more idle you are, the more chances that bad stuff is going to creep in.
Right.
And also, if you couple that with like-minded people, you're exactly right. Nobody knows a vet like a vet. And if a vet's in trouble, the first person that's going to spot it is one of your friends, somebody that deployed, not necessarily with you, but that has seen that look, has smelled and felt how you're going to go through that. Brian, we say that all the time when we're on the road. We see damaged humans, And the idea is that some of
Yeah,
those damaged humans don't want to get the help.
we're usually just talking about each other when
Yeah,
we're talking about
the
that.
king of
So
damaged humans. Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
So,
So what? So you still do now you also do like search and rescue stuff now on the civilian side, correct? So you're
Yes.
or starting it or yeah.
Yeah. So I volunteer. I do a lot of volunteer work.
Yeah, you do.
And,
You do.
we're starting to see a
Yeah,
trend
you
here.
do
Escape
because
is fanning.
a lot of your time is for other people. So I appreciate you
yeah.
even taking the time to come on here.
No, I started with the San Bernardino Sheriff's Office that has a air rescue program, which is a unique program because I don't know of any around the country that has the same type of where you're a sworn volunteer, you're part of an actual crew. So it's we're doing all of the work that the paid crew does as well. So and they train you and they do all of that stuff. So I did that because I love search and rescue, and San Bernardino County is actually the largest county in the country.
Yeah, it's
And so we
huge.
cover a lot of stuff, and the potential to get rescues and search and rescue, I mean, they're pretty busy. So I wanted to jump on that opportunity just for the, get back into it, start learning again, and fly and do
So
what I love.
So how does it compare with like how the military runs it? Like I'm curious as to how that like civilian, and I don't want you to like get yourself in trouble or something or like say something negative. Like, yeah, all right, maybe we won't. But like it's because there's differences and but it's a different application as well because I know there's like a lot of people like, oh, these law enforcement or this needs to learn from the military. It's like, well, in some areas, but also
Yeah,
not so much in others. So I don't know what what
right.
the big differences are that you see or how that works.
I would actually say the big difference I've noticed so far is in the military, you have, I don't want to say it's autonomy, but we don't, we're in situations that if you either do it or you don't, and
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's more unsafe in the military, and just, we have a lot more, I guess, as I've noticed as a medical person, a little bit more freedom to do things.
Hmm.
Whereas in the civilian sector, you have more protocols, that
Yeah.
you have to abide by. You could be flying with your medical director. Like when I was in the Navy, I wouldn't even see my medical director. They weren't deployed with us. We're operating a lot on our own, you know, knowledge and our own skill set. So that's probably the biggest difference so far that I've seen.
Yeah, I was just say it's a definitely, for obvious reasons, a little bit more risk averse. There's more liability issues on the civilian
Right.
side, and it's not, I
Right.
mean, it's not a combat skill set. It's not. It's a completely different kind of outlook and mindset on a lot of it. Even though maybe some of the procedures and stuff might be similar, like it's probably you probably can do less. I bet, like in terms of working on a patient of what you're allowed to do. I bet you it's less on the
Yeah.
civilian side, probably, huh?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Big shout out though, San Bernardino. One of the things about the county SO there. So early days of Combat Hunter, we were going to urban training environments and rural training environments because we weren't sure where anybody was going to deploy. And shout out Mojave Viper, they had a great training program there. But the idea is a dense urban training center to see people at the limits of your observation and determine whether their human behavior is going to be most likely or most dangerous course of action. There was no such place as that. So we went to San Bernardino County Sheriff at that time, and he said, okay, what do you want? And we said, well, we want to be on top of the target. We want to be on the Walmart at midnight. We want to be able to go into these places and see all of this other stuff. And I mean, we had a laundry list of things that we wanted to see in progress. And we want you guys there to cover our six while we're out there doing it. And we'll trade training for your folks. And usually this is where you get laughed out of the office.
Yeah.
And they were like, honest to God, they were like, let's go. What do you want to do? They were relentless in their pursuit of knowledge. And I think the skills transfer went both ways because we had a lot of young lieutenants that were leading platoons of Marines that were going into kinetic combat in very dangerous places. And I think that symbiosis, that relationship worked out perfectly. So shout out to them. Shout out to a lot of the California law enforcement that endured the Combat Hunter years, let's call it.
Yeah. And that's the nice thing about San Bernardino is that they really do love to work with military. I mean, it's, they're very open arms and welcoming with us. So yeah.
Absolutely. And it shows. It really does.
Yep.
Yeah, plus in San Bernardino, you can get, I mean, you don't know if you're going to be sitting on it's a meth house, a bomb house,
Yeah.
a clown house, but I
Yep.
mean,
Which
it's
is the
just,
same, which is the same feeling I get when I visit Marin. No
yeah,
matter where he's, if he's in East Coast Marines or the West Coast Marines, it's like, what fresh hell am I walking into now?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's definitely similar, similar situation.
Yeah.
So I definitely
Yep.
fit right in out there with all those folks out in San Bernardino. But so I because you kind of went from enlisted to the officer side in the Navy, and then I mean I don't know what type of like leadership positions you ended up getting into or anything, but that in itself gives a perspective, right? So when we talk about some of the stuff that we do and what we train with folks, it's all about perspective, right? And one of the things you have to train and learn how to do is literally take another human being's perspective to open your eyes, see the world a little bit differently. So I mean, what I usually find in Mustangs and people that go from enlisted to officer is like they're it's like one or the other. They're either like the
Yep.
greatest or like
Yep.
the
The
absolute
worst.
Worst
worst.
decision they've
Yep.
And
ever
like
made,
Yes.
ever. Yeah.
and so
No.
you fall
Yeah.
in, I feel like, more on like one of the greatest side, because you have that enlisted side where you're like you're gonna call bullshit, but now you also
Yeah.
have a responsibility where you get to see it. So what was that like for you? And then did you ever have to see someone who you're like you were similar rank with, and then now you're like their officer in charge or something? Or
No, I was never in that situation. No, I wasn't. Yeah, you're right about missing. So they're either great or they're just the most terrible human beings. So, and I look at it as, they always say like, don't forget where you come from.
mm-hmm.
So I really tried that. That was always in the back of my mind. Don't forget where you come from. I find that some of these guys forget that. I think it becomes this like, oh, what's on my collar type of thing. And I've always said your respect isn't on your collar. Like that's not, just because you're wearing a certain thing does not mean you have respect from your people. And that's a huge thing. So, you have to gain that respect. And coming from being enlisted, I felt like I had a better grasp on that, on how to relate with them. And I actually was told early in my career, like the first couple of years of being an officer, that I need to take my enlisted hat off. Because it's that
Yep.
fine line. It's like those are my people, and that's where I trended towards, because I just felt more comfortable in those groups. But there is a line, like you can't be buddies with them anymore, and you have to, you're like, I was, for us in nursing, we're in a hospital and we're on a ward and we work closely with the corpsman, but you have to have that division, you have to have that line.
Right, and that goes with almost like any type of leadership position. Once you get in charge and you are now established as that person who like you, there has to be that. And I've seen, like I said, I've seen people handle that really well. I've seen people handle that really poorly. I've seen seen the good, bad, and the ugly. So what is it that like from because I love that perspective that some people can have. One, you just being a female, first going into the search and rescue, which is probably an all-male field in the Navy, at least at the time, right?
Yeah.
Then you went from enlisted to officer, and then you're getting moved. Like it's just all those different experiences build those file folders. So like, what sticks out to you? Like, what works, what doesn't? What are people doing right, and what are people doing wrong?
It's the whole leadership aspect. I feel like it's pretty easy to like, to be a good leader, and I think there are more bad leaders than there are good leaders. But my thing is that you have to have respect from the people that work under you. If you don't have their respect, then you as a leader, it's just not going to work, right? So people who respect you, they'll do anything for you. Is how I look at it. And I remember, when I first started in the hospital, the corpsman, and you have to know, why are they here? What's the purpose of them being here? And you had some nurses that didn't have the perspective of being a corpsman, or didn't quite understood, where they're going to. Like, these guys are about to go out with Marines, and they're,
Mm-hmm.
be the only medical person for, however, a battalion, whatever it is. And that's what we're there to train them for. And that's what I've always, when I first started, was like, this is my job, is to train him to be on his own with the Marines in a very kinetic environment, a really bad environment. These are young kids, and that's the stance I took. And so every chance I get, I would try to train them. And, and with that, they saw like this person actually cares about me, and they care about my well-being, and they care that, I'm prepared to do what I need to do. And so I think I've always had that reputation with me, where you'd have some nurses, which wasn't really their fault. They just didn't have that perspective. They were brand new themselves. They're having the corpsman do all the shit work, or they're having them, just do the vital signs or wipe the asses of the patients, whatever. And it's like, that's not what they're there for, like, and I would go in and I would get dirty with them. And again, that just shows, oh, this person is actually, she's here for me. And that's what I wanted to make clear, is that I'm here to make sure you are adequately prepared to go out and do a very, very difficult job. Because I was scared for them. I mean,
yeah,
being a corpsman in a Marine unit, like, especially during those times, is just, that's terrifying to be an 18-year-old. And I've been there before, not in that circumstance, but being an 18-year-old expected to, come out of a helicopter and save a pilot who's probably whatever it is. And it's just like, oh my God, I'm a child. Like,
yeah.
I'm doing this. But
yeah, you have those moments where you're like, okay, well, this just got real.
yeah,
Wow,
exactly.
I'm dealing with this situation now. This is not what I expected.
Right.
Let's talk about that perspective of getting out for a second. And one of the things, Nikki, you're riding around in a war zone with one foot on a skid in a Black Hawk. You know what you're getting into. You knew how your day was going to start. You likely knew how it was going to end, and you knew the risk. Now you're back on the block, and you're still taking a tremendous amount of risk. I'm not saying that you're risk averse now, but think about this. Yesterday in Milwaukee, a guy walks into work after 17 years and executes a bunch of his coworkers. School shooters go to the school. They don't go to another school. They go to their own school, because that's where they felt the frustration. They want to act out. Workplace violence is the same. So you're going to see more of those. Those aren't going to end. And one of them, and Brian and I work a lot in the healthcare field. So we go in and we talk about psychological triage and cognitive triage, because a situation where a person comes in and is frustrated in a hospital setting, or it's just a husband-wife or a husband-husband or whatever the relationship is, and why do you take it to work? Because that's where I'm most comfortable. I spend more time at work than I spend anywhere else. So what's it like knowing that you've got the same amount of risk now walking into the ER and getting shot in a workplace violence situation as you did when Taliban or Al Qaeda or Daesh were trying to come over the HESCO barriers? What does that feel like, and how do you prepare for that?
So I am always a worst case scenario type of person. I do weird things, like when I'm in a grocery store and I'm in line, I imagine the guy in front of me, and it's more of the medical side, right? Because that's my world. I imagine the guy in front of me dropping dead, and then I start running through.
Brian does that all the time about me, but it's for a completely different reason. But I'm sorry.
But yeah, I just I start going through the motions of what would I do? What's the first step? What's the second step? And I don't know, like I don't trust anybody. So I'm kind of always situational.
Part of that sociopathic personality disorder.
Probably, yeah. Exactly. So I'm always kind of just thinking in the back of my head, what if this happens? What if this happens? Where am I going to go? Where's the exit? Blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, it sounds kind of cliche, but I mean, I do that because.
No, and it's not too, and that's kind of what we get into people's, like someone who doesn't have any training or experience to do that, right? So even just medical training, someone has, like you understand a process and how to do things and processes a scene, just any basic medical care, you learn about, like, hey, we got to focus on these people, like, hey, those people might not be worth saving, or these people don't need our help right now. They're going to have to bleed out a little bit longer because it's more important. So you learn to navigate that complicated world, right? So even what you're doing is just, hey, what if this happens? Or if he does that, like, it's so easy and such low calorie stuff that you can do that once you start doing it, you actually don't ever stop. And now it's just running like an operating system, right? A new little iPhone update you got, and it's just running in the background. You don't even realize it. So when those things do occur, you already have a plan. You actually planned out what your response is going to be and what you're going to do. So you're actually ahead of the curve doing that.
Well, it also conditions you mentally too. So, to respond in those situations. And I've noticed in really stressful situations, I tend to get calmer. So I don't know if it's because of like me doing stuff like that, or if I am a sociopath.
It's training.
You no longer have to worry about that because you have now been diagnosed, so you're good. You can flash that card. You only get to use it once, though. You only get to use that sociopath card once.
No, but what so what you're actually talking about is it's where someone might become overwhelmed by events because of just stress, arousal in the environment. You're actually become, so what happens in those cases is physiologically, instead of thinking about everything that's going on, you now have a plan and you know what to do. So your brain literally focuses on just those tasks in hand. And that's why some people get that, like, oh, it was like time slowed down, I had tunnel vision. Well, it's like, well, technically it did, because you don't normally process everything that fast because you're taking everything in environment. Now, when those situations occur, if you have that plan, if you have that training, and that's what we're always talking about, that's that level of performance. So you're able to perform literally at a higher cognitive level than the average person. And that's what gets into, a lot of folks in healthcare and stuff. And we keep bringing that up just because you have such a background in it, right?
Vast experience.
And what happens in hospitals here in the US is that, like, we're just reading now, and it's coming out that, like, the number 3 leading cause of death in the United States is like medical malpractice. And you're like, well, how does that happen? Like, how do people, and it gets into that performance of what you can handle in those stressful situations or not stressful situations, and how mistakes occur. And it's a failure in perforance is what
exactly.
it is.
And a perfect example of that is just a few minutes ago when Marin was talking about who's going to live and who's going to die. Marin voted himself, like in Lord of the Flies, leader of the homeless people that surround his little encampment there. So
I'm
he
in a
chooses
refrigerator
those
box
type
right
of things.
now.
But no, but that's a really valid point, Brian. I want to make sure that we take some time to flesh that out.
Just about you
the Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, you get back at what my
no,
homeless
I'm worried about. I've
encampment?
diagnosed both of you, and both of you are in California. So if you two ever get together, we have the perfect storm of homicidal fantasy and
it's just
ideation. You get what I'm saying? So that'll be good. That's a good idea.
We'll call you from the road, Greg.
I don't want to know. I won't answer that phone.
Bodies everywhere, just like, yeah, we're ready to burn this down. Sure, why not?
Well, I am getting into long-range shooting, so
yeah, we noticed that. Thank you.
I saw that.
That's
so
a good skill.
I totally forget. So Greg, after she posted something, I was like, hey, like, what caliber was that or whatever? And she's going on. She's like, yeah, I hit it at like a mile away. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Sorry, I didn't mention this, but if you had 4 hours of instruction, then hit a target a mile away, that's like amazingly good. Sorry for not giving you a pat on the back.
Is it really?
I was like, well, it was one of those times
really
where I need to learn how to compliment people when they've earned it, because I never do.
But
like,
what in your background, Brian, kept you from complimenting her? What could have beaten you down every single day and robbed you of soul? So all you do is mimic the human behaviors of other humans.
So literally, like in front of me, my old man would tell my younger brother, like, if you keep acting like this, you're gonna turn out like your older brother. And he'd be like, what's going on here? I'd be like, I'm standing right here. No, okay. So no, but to go
back to the malpractice.
To go back to the performance, like what, like, and I think our belief is that, with training changes behavior, right? So It's all about your level of training and experience, but training is everything, man. So what do you notice differently, like from the civilian side versus the military side? And like, I know there's differences just in operating environment and mission, and there's a lot of similarities of camaraderie and people in those positions and kind of understanding each other and living a different life. But like, what do you see differently about like the training or how people operate in like standard healthcare in the US versus like military overseas deployed?
So I don't really have a lot of experience in the civilian sector in hospitals, because I per diem at the ER at Balboa, because that's where I came from, and I just,
all right, yeah,
it was an easy fit.
Yeah.
I will say one of my big gripes with military training is that we don't take it serious enough. And I can't speak for the line units because I don't know. I mean, you guys seem to be training all the time, but for the medical personnel in the military, we're at these hospitals that are, basically a civilian hospital, right? I mean, we're doing the same type of work. We're doing shifts. Our administrators are worried about patient numbers and money and all that stuff. And it really, yes, we're military, but we're not really in a military environment versus like let's say a Marine infantryman who, when your every day is revolving around your job and training and going out in the dirt and shooting and whatever it is to prepare you to be in that environment.
Eating crayons, throwing rocks.
Eating crayons, yes,
Flat-sided crayons.
Yeah. So the medical personnel, and I think this is what I also said to my senior nurse when she pulled me aside. I said, what contributes to that, not being mentally prepared is that you're yanking a nurse or a doctor, and now you're putting him into this environment with limited resources. It's a pretty hostile environment. We don't, nothing that we're used to, and expecting us to operate like, it's no big deal. So people aren't prepared for that. I mean, even though we're doctors and nurses and we expect to see a certain amount of casualties or, injuries, you're never going to be prepared to see blown off limbs and, the injuries that we see in these very young people in this population. And then on top of it, being in an environment where you don't have your normal resources, where you don't have, everything pretty much at your disposal like you're used to when you're back here. And then the possibility, you're in a fob or whatever, but, there are possibilities of still getting hurt, and, you're sleeping next to the Afghan army, they can turn on you at any time. So it's a different environment, and we aren't particularly prepared for that. And then one of the things that I was expected to do, so I was with a ground Role 2 team, a surgical team, damage control surgery. So that's what we did, is we're doing the damage control surgery in tents, and, just making sure that we can keep the person alive to get them back to the Role 3. What they did not set up was the transport piece of it. So the people that were doing most of the transports intra-theater was DUSOS, right? But the medics at the time didn't have the critical care piece to take our patients. So when they come out of damage control surgery, they are now on vents and drips and blood and all the stuff that the medics weren't trained on at the time. And what would happen is I'm supposed to be on the ground team, and they would look at me and say, hey, you need to get on the back of the helicopter and fly this critical patient that you still need to resuscitate back to the Role 3. For me, it wasn't too bad because I had the helicopter experience, but it still was very difficult because I was still pretty new with the critical care stuff. Mm. I was on my own. I wasn't part of the crew. They didn't bring me, comms unless I asked for it later on, which I got smart and did. They would leave me most of the times where, and so I'd have to figure out my way
how
back
to get back
to my unit. I had no idea. I was never trained for this. So it was just, it was a shit show. And then I thought about, well, God, I was, at the time, I'm in my 30s, have the helicopter background. I was like, we're doing this to 23, 24-year-old nurses that have never flown before, who are really new at critical care, and throwing them in this environment, I had transfers where I was literally resuscitating the patient. So I had 4 units of blood going. It was very terrible injuries. I've got him ventilated, but, I'm very new at using a ventilator. I'm in the squat position, trying to do all of this, keep him sedated, paralyzed, all of this stuff that, on some instances was the first time I've ever done it, and I'm doing it by myself. Jeez. And I can't communicate to my crew. It's just a very stressful time. And I came back from that, and I was like, this is bullshit that we do this to people. No wonder why people are coming back.
And we just want to shout out to the Afghan Army and the ANCOP, who comprise our viewers and our listeners. Nikki didn't mean anything that you could turn at any moment. That was an inside joke. Yeah, so now we have that insider threat to deal with. No, great comments, and I wish Shelly were here to comment on that as well, because Shelly and I took part in the Marine Corps Lioness program, and Mattis and many other thinkers back then were like, hey, listen, your first contact in country should be no worse than your contact that's here. And so as far as searching females and doing, they came up to us at the beginning of the training, and we did the training here in the States and then in Iraq. And they came up to us, and we were all crying in a big huddle in a circle. And they were saying, we had some of the skills, but we didn't have the confidence that went along with the competence. And here, all of a sudden, we were out there carrying guns with people that were blowing up around us. And sometimes just demystifying, sometimes having that coach or that mentor, somebody that's been there that can talk you off the ledge, that's hugely important. And you being able to see that That's the difference between training and education. We'll go
Yeah.
into a place like a hospital, or we'll go to a school, and they'll go, oh, we have policies in place. And we're like, yeah, we're here to talk about your training. And they go, oh, we have a checklist, and we're prepared
Yeah.
for all that. You're not prepared for shit.
No.
And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, when it does happen, then they're scrambling to get more armed people in the hallways. And that's not the answer. And
Right.
so you really helped some people listening to this broadcast with the scales dropping from their eyes. Now, I've got a daughter, and my daughter is damaged goods because she's your age, and she's on her PhD program, and she's what we call Shelley trained. So I'm never going to influence her. But Marin still has a daughter that's influenceable. Thank God his wife is doing most of the teaching and transferring and learning. But what would you say?
We mostly just hang out and wrestle and play
through the bars with the person sitting and watching you, like in Mrs. Doubtfire. But Nikki, what would you say to that impressionable young female that is sitting listening to the broadcast because it's bleeding over from dad or mom watching? What would you tell them? What are they going to do to get where you are now? Because one of the things when we're on the road, people go, hey, I want to do what you do. And it's like, okay, well, when I started this, I was a slim black female. Do you get what I'm trying to say? And now I'm popping oxycodone like it's free, and I'm 100 years old. It took all of those scars to get here. What would you tell that female that keeps getting a door slammed or saying no, or you might not be able to tell? What advice would you give her?
My advice is to find a way around it. If you really want to do something, then do it and figure it out. You have to be proactive though. And that's what, with this generation, especially, is, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like they think things are just going to drop in their laps, and, or they're easy to be discouraged.
So true.
And it's like, you have to be proactive in what you want. Nobody's going to give it to you. So if you want something,
and it's not on an app. Exactly. You're right on, spot on.
Yeah. If you want something, set your goals and figure out how to get there. And yes, you're going to get a lot of doors slammed in your face. You're going to get a lot of no's, but don't take that. Don't just sit there and take that, figure it out. There's always a way around.
Great advice. Absolutely. Great advice.
So when, man, I'm just sitting here, sorry, playing in my head, like your crazy stories from Afghanistan and different stuff. And like, man, it's just bringing back all the worst memories, but
that's where Marin and I actually decided to work together, just so you know. So we see each other in Iraq and multiple deployments.
Yeah.
We saw each other at Penn, and then all of a sudden we're at the infantry immersive trainer, and then I'm getting off. I think it was Kandahar airfield or something like that.
Kabul.
And I walk by this angry, it was Kabul, and I walk by this little angry guy, and I look at him and I go, hey, it's Marin. And so he's going, hey, and that's how we decided, hey, what the hell? Somebody keeps putting us together, so we might as well work together.
Yeah, but you had these like little. I've had the same situation where you're just like, oh my god, like this is complete chaos. I can't believe this happens. Because when you get down and do training, like you said, is one thing and how it's supposed to run, and then when you get down there and get your hands dirty, you're like, hey, like this isn't really working, or this isn't how it's supposed to be, or this is dirty or messy, or it's not what you think. And like I had like you get these little moments of frustration and anger or whatever the emotional roller coaster. But I had these I have one story, and I'm curious if you had something similar, but mine was like after a long day, and I had a lot of close calls, like really, really close calls. I mean, I know everyone does, but there were some where guys were looking at me like, can you go stand over there? Cause you're I don't like what you're bringing to the table. And one was like, we're in a house. I was downstairs, like literally just trying to get a couple hours of sleep or an hour of sleep, and like a RPG rocket came punched through the wall and spun around in there and just missed me, blew debris on me, and just didn't go. If I got up and was like, oh, hey, let's stay out of this room, don't go in there, right? But like you had all this, and I was dead tired. Then we walked back, and then we're getting like a vehicle movement back, whatever. We're loading up on a truck, and like my buddy just looks right at me. He's like, hey man, like are you good, man? Like you look like you're a little out of it. And I just looked at him. I was like, hey man, it just I really don't think I'm going to make it out of here. I don't think I'm going to make it through this deployment. And he looked me just dead in the face, and he's like, Brian, I completely understand what you mean. I don't think you're going to make it out of here either. And he walked away.
Thank God for Maria.
Oh my God.
Died laughing. But the thing was, like, I died laughing, and it pulled my head out of my ass and was like, look, man, it's another day. Like, just like, this is what it is. You know what I mean? But it was like just that just cold, hard truth, and just also like just hilarity. So I don't know if you've had any like something like that where something clicked and you're just like, yeah, okay, well, I just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other right now. So,
Well, it's funny with the humor thing because I think, you know, especially medical people, we use humor a lot and probably at very inappropriate times. I remember being a nursing student at a level 1 trauma center. I won't name the city, but where I was studying, and we're in the ER. It was my first code, and you know, I'm super excited, and I'm doing chest compressions on this guy who happened to be, you know, a little older, a little bit heavier, and he, like, you know, had a heart attack. And the nurses were just saying stuff that was like, I don't think that's appropriate right now. And I'm just, you know, I'm brand new nurse, but you know, and I'm just kind of like, wow, what a B, you know, why would you, you know, it was comments like, you know, he was on a treadmill at the time, and, you know, and it was like, oh, it's a little too late, isn't it?
So why are you looking at me when you're saying this?
I look right
Damn it. Damn it. Well, you just described my day. Thank you.
No, well, hopefully you don't get on a treadmill and have a heart attack.
I'm in the middle of nowhere. Like, if I code, that's it. Don't worry. Ain't nobody coming.
But yeah, I mean, one of the nurses, I don't, something like, it's, you know, don't you think it was a little late for that? Or I don't know, something crazy. And I remember just like looking at her like, God, what a, you know, I'm just excited nursing student. And, but looking back on it now, it's like, you know, she wasn't trying to be like that. You have to, when you do that, because it was a trauma center, right? So they see the worst of the worst all the time. And when you see that over and over again, you have to have some sort of a, you know, whether it's a defense mechanism or not, but to, you know, humor seems to be the go-to.
It's gallows humor. Absolute psychological
gallows humor.
What you have to do is your brain will only allow you to accept so much information into a file folder before it becomes corrupt. And if the information is so heinous and so against all your other file folders, your brain will insulate you against those. And that's why we sometimes have repressed memories. And from that, emergency first responders, not firemen, because they only respond when the fire is going on. They'll hate me for that, top paid firemen. But emergency services, LE. And so Marin and I were at a situation that was kind of heinous. And the idea was that I was talking and I used the term DRT. And the guy next to me goes, what is that? And I said, it's dead right there. You know, we're not going to be able to do anything. And so they were all butthurt about that one. But then Marin, famous comment, somebody says, hey, is that guy dying? And Marin's going, no, but he's trying. And not that you want hate, death, or fear on another human. The fact is that it's inevitable in certain situations. And you know what? The way that you can continue and get into those bloody, slippery, horrible situations and actually walk out and smoke a cigarette and go to bed is by being able to joke about it. Because if you weren't laughing, you'd be crying. And too much crying, the mirror neurons, everybody's crying. It's like a yawn. One yawn, everybody's crying, you know? So you got to avoid that. So we totally get that. We absolutely get that. But remember, even though you're a sociopath, that's the only normal thing you've said in the last hour. Just so you know that we can actually point to.
So well, especially you bring it up with nurses are the same, because like, so my friend Shannon, she's a ER nurse, and all of her friends, and this is years ago, like she's like, yeah, we're going out like this afternoon or whatever, or a little, you know, happy hour thing or whatever. Why don't you come out? And I was like, yeah, I'll be out, whatever. I'll link up with you. And we're out there, and I'm just like, I don't know, like your friends can. I'm not comfortable with someone who can consume more alcohol than I can and still stand up. Like, what is wrong with you? And they're like, oh, this is just the ER nurses. I was like, this is hilarious. And they were completely insane. And I was like, all right, my kind of people here. I get it. Like, but it's that high stress jobs, and you just say the craziest, dumbest stuff. And when you're in those groups though, like it's completely accepted. That's the great part.
Well, and it's a way of venting. It's a way of blowing off steam. And like me, it's a knee-jerk reaction to joke about firemen. So my son's a fireman. My son is Shelley trained as well. So he's got 9 jobs. They're all full-time jobs, and he manages them perfectly. I do one thing in my life right. Do you get what I'm saying? And everything else fails. I'm miserable at everything. So the fireman thing, I'm always around his buddies that are fireman friends. I'll walk in, meet one, or somebody comes to one of the training sessions, and I'm bashing on firemen. They go, why are you so hard on firemen? They're saving lives and they're doing. It's just a cop thing. And the same thing with Brian being a Marine and me being a former soldier. We're always joking. Marines communicate with a series of grunts and clicks. I passed my ASVAB. You really don't mean anything by it. With me to Brian, I do, because it's called bullying.
Right.
It's psychological warfare.
It's an abusive work environment.
It is a horribly abusive work environment. But with everybody else that I meet, I have no problems with that. So do you find that you've ever been in a situation where you let some of that slip and it was inappropriate? Because we accidentally do that sometimes. We did one recently in Princeton, New Jersey at a Dunkin' Donuts where I let a comment slip that was completely not
and
safe.
And I piled on
humans.
top of it and realized the lady went in reaching to get her straw, was like just backed out and
we spent the next 10 minutes going, look, we're not really like this. We're so sorry. Please don't hold this against us. Has that happened to you?
Oh, I mean, I grew up with all males and then Marines, and what's normal to me is completely inappropriate probably to everybody else. So it's having to adjust to thinking about the environment you're in.
Exactly.
Being the female, everyone's like, oh, don't get offended. I'm always like, I'm probably the most offensive person.
Yeah.
So,
we've learned that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I've said a lot of inappropriate things, and even being around my best friends who've never been in the military, I'm sure things that I say sometimes are like, what are you talking about? But again, I mean, I grew up with all males, and very, very type A, and a little bit of an ego type male. So yeah,
it's totally healthy as long as you're not hurting anybody. The idea is. When you are trying to decompress, you have to have a safe environment. You have to have the little nest.
Right.
Marin's little nest, the box that he's created behind him. It's under the bridge where
refrigerator
thank God
box,
it's not raining. But and he's had a sheet up that looks like a convincing house, but it's not. But the idea is that once you've decided that you're going to have that safe area, you got to be able to do that. You got to be able to call somebody in the middle of the night and go, hey, I'm broken. I need help. I need to put some things back together. And that's one of those things that not only feeds resilience, but it's a counter-suicide strategy as well. And there's a lot of people in our line of work that tend to commit suicide. And I think one of the large reasons is because you no longer feel relevant in a mission. When you're mission essential, it's the greatest feeling in the world.
Yeah.
And you get all the endorphins, and you get all the norepinephrine, and you get all the wonderful catecholamine group, and the amygdala is just sending out love all the time. But when you don't feel, when you've got nothing to lose. That's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where I'm at, I think, right now is, in the beginning, I piled all this stuff up to feel relevant. And now I'm realizing that didn't make me happy. That actually made it worse because, again, I spread myself so thin. And now I'm getting to this place where, what I thought was me being relevant, didn't work for me, but, staying in the game or being part of whatever group, I thought would be like, okay, well, this is it. This is going to make me feel like, what I'm missing. And it didn't. And so now I'm doing things for myself. And
that's a brilliant strategy. Yep. Yeah. That's a karate Miyagi. Either you karate do or you karate no do, if you remember the old film, because if you karate no do, you get squashed in the middle of the road. And Nikki, what you're talking about is something that our viewers and listeners can adapt into their own life. If you're trying to chase somebody else's dream, if you're trying to live somebody else's life, it's not going to be fulfilling. And at the end of the day, look, it took Nikki, folks, a year to discover where she's at now. And that demonstrates not only resilience, but your stick-to-itiveness. That's another term from old people like me where, get up and do that. Many people think there's an answer in an app. Many people think that there's going to be an answer in some first-person shooter game. That's not where it's at. Where it's at is getting out there and rediscovering yourself and saying, these are the things that make me happy. These are the things that I'm going to do to pay it back and to live the rest of my life in a fulfilled manner.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you've heard. I'm sure you've heard the expression, right? It's physician, heal thyself, right? And that comes down to it. Is like I always simply like, look, you gotta because it took me a long time to realize like, oh, I'm the problem. Oh, all right. Well, let's just I just fix myself then.
Well, Marin actually had his first website was Marin Heal Thyself, and didn't have any hits except for those guys from the Afghan army. Those guys can put on you at any second.
So, but that's, and I always try to get that to people is like, you come out and you go through that. And I always tell the story out here all the time with different folks when we were doing some work and we had these big brain behavioral scientist folks and they were doing this testing and all this stuff. And when we would talk and I'd explain stuff, I was like, yeah, this happened. And, I was able to do that. Like, and, I told them this story about like, how I got super pissed at this person and this, and I walked away and I calmed myself down. And they were looking at me like, okay, you have horrible anger issues. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I walked away from the situation.
Yeah.
They're like, no, you should not have gotten that angry. There's no reason to. And I was like,
and then he got angry with them, and
yeah,
we're like,
I was like,
wait, hold on.
No.
Disproportionate reactions to the
Exactly.
situation. Yeah, that was me. So that was me at Disneyland right after I got back from Afghanistan. And mind you, I was in Haiti right before that. My best friends call me and they're like, oh, hey, let's go to Disneyland. And I already don't like that.
Oh, great.
So,
great.
But I was like, oh, I haven't seen my kids in a year. So yeah, let's do this and kids will have fun, whatever. And I think I lasted maybe 2 or 3 hours. And they were saying, I had a double stroller with my kids in there. And they said, the next thing we know is you were like, I'm effing done.
That's wonderful.
Take my stroller. And I had balloons tied to my stroller. And they say, all we saw was this lady with a stroller with balloons bouncing off of people headed for the freaking beelining for the exit. And, it was me. And they're calling after me, but Disneyland's the happiest place on earth.
Yeah. I knew I saw you from somewhere, and that's from the poster where you can't get in and out. They won't get the bracelet. Yeah. And Marin's had a very similar experience because the state mandates when he can see his children.
Yeah.
Because of incidents like that. No, but you know what the hard part is when somebody sees you. I want to put myself in the viewer or the listener that saw that what happened is you have a damaged human that is acting out because they're broken. Something's broken and something's leaking out. And it's okay because we have those emotional meltdowns sometimes. But the idea is what next? What did people around you help you do? And that's what's sometimes wrong is people turn a blind eye. They're down and in. They don't see what's happening around them. And that's how these situations of intense violence or rage manifest themselves. Sometimes you need time on your own. That's great. But if you got too much time on your own and you're stewing and the kettle is coming over, somebody needs to walk up and go, time out, what's on your mind? And
right.
Start the de-escalation process. So it's great that you shared that with us because, listen, you're Teflon, you're Iron Man. We get that. But that just showed that the sociopath also has a human side. And listen, nobody in the military and nobody in police work, maybe a fireman, but nobody in emergency services is ever going to say, I'm bullet, you can hurt me. They're going to say, I'm bulletproof. I can take you, put me back in, coach. And that's part of the facade that we build up. And it's hard sometimes to be be the mom, be the leader, put up with the horseshit. You just got back, and now all of a sudden everybody's saying it's a small world, and you wish you had a 2-pound sledge. Totally normal for people to do that, as long as they seek help and don't go to Ace Hardware, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, we have a cooling off period here in California.
Yeah, right.
And for good reason. Yeah. I don't know where Marin is on the tree, but for very good reason. It's called the Marin Law.
Well, that's hey, look, who puts a playground next to a bar? Okay, I had to go to the bathroom.
And knowing he's an Irish guy,
so
exactly.
I didn't know. Look, it was all a misunderstanding. But that adds a whole nother level onto
it. Really does
your experience. Just you did all of that again. Like you did all of that with your kids. So like you still had to go deploy and be a badass and do all this stuff and have this work and you had children at the time. So it's like. Maybe that's why we think you're just a complete sociopath, or maybe you were just thinking about them the whole time, so you just compartmentalize because,
or maybe they're not even your kids; they're somebody else's kids. Or you've never had kids, but you're seeing them. Yeah. Those are other things. We could tell you what that psychological stance is too.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing with the medical world, not to bash so hard on Navy medicine, but I feel like with line units, when you come back from deployment, you get quite a bit of time to sort of, be off and slow down a little bit, or it seemed like that anyway. But for us, I got back from the Haiti thing and then Afghanistan 10 months, and I come back and I've got them on the phone like, hey, you need to come back to work. And I was in the ICU at the time, so go back to shifts, and our shifts are crazy. It's 12 hours. It's we do 6 weeks a day, 6 weeks a night, 6 weeks a day. I mean, it's just this rotating thing. they wanted to put me back on nights because, well, you haven't been here for the last year. And I'm like, but I wasn't on vacation.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeez.
Was it Tahiti? Where were you? Yeah.
I know. I mean, you know, so they're throwing you back on nights, and it was 2 weeks after I came back from all of that, and I'm now thrown back into patient care and worrying about somebody else, and never had the time to really decompress and, you know, figure it out, which I don't know, maybe good or bad, but
Oh, that time is essential. That
yeah.
time is essential. Too much time in the huddle or too much time out of the huddle is not good for you. And there's got to be time that during that break, like I'll give you an example. You're exactly right, and obviously that when you're done and you come back and before your next workup, they give you a sufficient amount of time off. But now it's in the ramp up to go, right? And
Right.
Marin and Shelly and I and some of our instructors, we drop in. We know exactly where you were down there on the little beach at what is that, Marin? Corona. Coronado. That's it. I don't want to say coronavirus. Holy crap. But we would go down there, for example, and we'd be doing SEALs on their way to somewhere, or we'd be at North Carolina. We'd be doing some unit that's on the way somewhere from whatever place. And all of a sudden you're sitting there on a weekend, on the only free weekend that they were going to have with their family before deployment. And they're looking at us like we're a couple of assholes. Hey, we've been voluntold to take this training. Now, the training was good and it was relevant and it was necessary, but the military always does that. They're like, well, let's shove this in here and let's put that there. And then they were going to us, they were going like, well, can you train in a plane? Can you train on a boat? Can you train with a goat? Can you train with like, and so we were everywhere.
Yeah, it was like, what was
and
it,
so,
Dr. Seuss book.
Honest
like,
to God, but it was like the worst Dr. Seuss. And so we're in Kuwait. And it's like, hey, these people are going to go, and some of them already died, and we're watching them come back. And the same thing happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they're going, can you fit just one more hour of training in there? Folks, you got to understand that the humans are your best assets, not your weapons. It's a human holding the weapon, not your technology. It's a human holding that technology.
Right.
And if you don't allow them to decompress and vent sometime, they're going to break. And when they break, it's going to leak all over everybody around them. So great point. Excellent point.
Yeah, we're too good at trying to remove the human out of the humans.
Yeah, we call it human in the loop now, don't we? Human in the loop. It's like, no, the loop goes around the human, you bastards. Totally get it.
Yeah, that's where we get into the breakdown in performance. So I mean that you know affects everyone working, and that's why we bring it back to that little you know fact that now one of the top leading causes of death in the United States is medical malpractice. And like, wait, you're going in to get fixed and get help. Like, why would that happen? And that's why it brings you back to like talking about all this is like, how does that even happen? It's like, well, this is how it happens because everyone's working too much and you're stressed and you're doing back-to-back shifts. And then, you know, instead of putting something in, you take something out or you put the wrong drug or this. And it's like, that happens all the time that happens. And you know, and it comes down to just basic human performance.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, in a hospital, they purposefully staff you lower than you're supposed to be. So they purposefully staff you at 80% versus 100% because, you know, on average, that's the amount of staff you need. So for us, it's like we're always operating understaffed, and it's just, you're tired. I mean, to take care of other humans and still try to take care of yourself. And, you know, just in a regular hospital, that's difficult. But now throw the element of all the military stuff and the stress and the deployments that, you know, and a lot of us during that time are just getting plucked out and like, oh, here you go on with this unit and whatever, good luck. And it's just like, wait, what? So, yeah, it's just difficult. And we don't do a very good job taking care of us, you know, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Nikki, we really we appreciate you coming on and talking about this stuff.
Because if we don't stop here, we're going to go on until it gets dark behind me, and Yodel and Pete tells us it's time to get off.
Yeah, right? No, and I know you're busy and got something on. Is there anything else of all these other groups that you work with or do work for? Remember, you're working for them, so whether or not you're getting paid, like that,
time for the shout out.
It's amazing when you go down that path and you start, oh yeah, I'll help out with this and this and this, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, like what's going on here? And they're all like, yeah, thanks. And you're like, hey, come on.
Right back into the meat grinder.
Yeah.
Well, one more group that I want to mention is the Huntington organization that they reached out to me on IG, and I looked into them, and they were just starting out with their research, but they do the research on burn pits and the toxins and how it's affecting a lot of our veterans now. And I had noticed, because I started out on the cancer floor, I had noticed a lot of these young guys getting these very, you know, weird cancers, a lot of cancers. I'm like, you know, when I was assigned to the cancer floor, I thought it would be just older people who lived their life. And, you know, it's kind of, whether it's liver cancer or whatever, you know, just things that we've done to ourselves over the years. But it ended up being more of like 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And, you know, that kind of piqued my interest. And then years later, with them reaching out to me, and now, you know, with a lot of our veterans coming home with really strange, rare cancers, and, you know, they're still in their 30s and 40s, and some pretty bad respiratory illnesses, people getting diagnosed with asthma out of nowhere. I mean, it's just really strange. So the main researcher started thinking about this, and her fiance was in one of the units where Hunter 7 is actually the call sign for the man who the organization is named for. And he had come back, he was in the Army, he came back and got diagnosed with a very rare cancer, ended up dying. He was in his 40s, and her fiance was in the same unit, and he has all kinds of issues, health issues. So she started kind of, you know, asking that question, like, well, where's the common denominator in that being, you know, overseas and serving near these burn pits? And if you remember being over there, I was right next to one, and, you know, and you're sitting there looking at it going, God, this can't be good. You're breathing in all this.
Exactly. More diesel fuel.
I have a
pit.
we had all that stuff too. I even had a photo of me somewhere, and it's literally like 3 of us standing around, and I had got my hands on these like wool gloves with the fingers cut out, and like we're just standing around like a burn pit, because it was winter, and like going like this, like we're warming up, and I'm like looking at it back, I was like, what were we breathing in that pit? It was,
well, I mean, like, the pits, you know, it's everything, right? Everything goes into these burn pits, even for like our medical waste, and
all the waste,
you know, it's feces. I mean, it's all this crap, and we're breathing it in. So I think the hardest part with this foundation is just getting the awareness out there, because it isn't, you know, I don't want to say injuries are sexy, but there are, you know, the trauma injuries gets more attention, right? But these, you know, this cancer, these respiratory illnesses, they're almost like hidden illnesses. You know, and it's very difficult to prove to the VA. And so just trying to get more of that awareness, and trying to help these guys who are coming down with these really strange cancers or whatever, and getting them the help that they need. And one of their main things too is that a lot of these guys get out and they start getting seen by civilian sector. You know, when a military veteran comes in with vague symptoms, oftentimes, you know, just in general, people that come in with vague symptoms, we just like, oh, it's a cold, or it's just this or whatever. But what we're trying to do is raise the awareness that, hey, if they're a veteran and they served overseas and they were near these burn pits, you need to start thinking beyond that, and there could be something wrong, because like the Hunter 7 that trained for us, he had these very generalized symptoms, and they kept like, oh, you're fine. And then by the time they caught it, it was too late. So a lot of these cancers could be caught earlier, and they could be cured, versus, you know, if you keep getting sent home because, oh, it's no big deal, or it's just a stomach ache, or whatever it is, you know, they end up dying in the long run. So just getting the awareness to the providers and the nurses and people that are not used to being around veterans, like, hey, you know, you got to think a little bit beyond the normal symptoms that people are having, and start thinking that it could be from something else. So
and that's a big thing where, like, I know everyone likes to bash on the VA, but it's actually, I mean, you only hear about obviously the worst case scenarios.
Stuff.
You don't hear about the good stuff that they do, but that's where they are uniquely qualified for some of these things, to where, you know, because it's not, if you go on the civilian side, especially like if you're normal or you're functioning healthy, like they're just like, you're not 70 years old. Why are you in here? You know what I mean? It's almost like they can't treat you. They don't know. Like, they're like, yeah, you're healthy. And because they're not looking for those other symptoms, just like you talked about. That's where some of those cases where the VA knows, all right, well, you could have, there's now the 7 things that you could possibly have, and we have to test for this. And I don't know how they're at in the process, but it's just one of those things where yeah, if you're not aware of these, of that normal doctor on the street isn't be thinking of any of that. They're thinking their normal protocol of what a patient's likely going to have, never even taking this into consideration. So that's it. Yeah.
Well, they're trying to work on software that integrates the records somehow, you know, where it's being able to, you can share it with the civilian sector, because now, you know, with the software that we use now, for a civilian entity to get the record is pretty difficult. And, you know, if they don't think about it, then to ask or have the person fill out the forms, and they're not going to know what the history is, versus, you know, being able to pull up the screen and seeing the same history that they would see on any of their patients. So that's one of the other things, but it all takes funding and recognition and awareness.
Right.
So yeah, just trying to get that out there.
Well, talking about the recognition and awareness, I mean, we hope that you'd be interested in coming on a future pod. We've got some incredible people that have been on the pod. You certainly are in that top range of people that just have a great message and a great way to get it across. And hopefully we haven't so insulted you that you'll say, hell no. But if you're not in jail or deployed, which is probably the two things that are most likely, we hope you would come back on, because we got so much more we want to talk about.
Oh, definitely. Yes, I'd love to.
All right. We appreciate it, Nikki. Thanks for coming on. And we always tell everyone, don't forget that training changes behavior.